The legacy of slavery certainly is something that a lot of white Americans are uneasy with. Blacks were supposedly less human than whites. They were able to marry and have children. Their children were taken from them and sold as commodities. All of these facts really just would sit on your life and make you feel that you were not worth anything, that you were not human. And it just totally crushed the human spirit. The British offered freedom to slaves that joined the army. I think that most sensible people would try to use that.
1776. The British, aided by black loyalists, are winning the war, while General Washington, a strident slave owner, won't allow enslaved people to join the fight. But that doesn't stop a woman named Phillis Wheatley from supporting the cause. She's not fighting on the front lines, but to me, she plays an important role in the revolution.
She is born a free person in West Africa. When she's around 7 or 8 years old, she's captured. She is put on a slave ship and she's sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. She arrives in 1761 in Boston, and so she's purchased by this family. The name of the ship that she sails on is the Phillis. The family's name is Wheatley, which is how we come to know her as Phillis Wheatley.
The Wheatleys, they encouraged her learning. The general consensus among whites at that time was that people of African descent could not learn. And so part of it, I'm sure, was an experiment to see if this little girl could really learn.
She was amazing. In 16 months after arriving in the colonies, she had mastered the English language as a child. She learned Greek and Latin. And this is at a moment in which most people couldn't read or write across the colonies.
And soon enough, she begins writing these poems. The Wheatleys see pretty immediately that she has this wonderful ability. She has this facility with the English language. And she's supported by the Wheatley family to the point where they decide that they would like to see if they can get a book of her poems published.
In 1773, Phillis publishes her first volume of poetry. Just 20 years old, she's the first African-American, first enslaved person, and only the third woman in America to publish a book of poems. Soon after, the Wheatleys emancipate Phillis. As a free woman, she openly expresses her support for Washington in a letter that gets published in April 1776.
I'm going to read from Phillis Wheatley's letter to George Washington. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine, with gold unfading, Washington, be thine.
She writes a letter to George Washington, a known slave owner, and she essentially celebrates him.
And I think that she sees this as a revolution that is going to bring some changes, especially for her own people. So she is encouraging him and hoping and wishing and anticipating great things from George Washington.
She is trying to figure out who is going to be the true champion of liberty. And if it seems like Washington is going to be the champion for liberty, then she wants him to be successful.
One of the things that's so interesting is that George Washington writes back to her in the most respectful of ways. He calls her madam, he praises her for her writing, basically says he couldn't do that, and says, please come, and I would be delighted to entertain you.
Washington signs his letter, I am, with great respect, your humble servant. No one knows for sure if they ever did meet face to face, but that doesn't matter. Phillis Wheatley has made her point.
George Washington, I think, realized that black people were human beings. People of color are looked down upon until we understand that they're human and they have something to offer. And she could see the effect of her own presence on Washington and understood that maybe more whites could be won over to realize that slavery was an injustice and an evil.